really all of Baha'i teachings, in a sense, are about encouraging the purification and spiritualization of self in order to achieve and attain divine characters and spiritual attributes. So in that sense, we can say the practice of the Baha'i faith as a whole is in fact a mystic practice.
Yeah, we are totally limited in our ability to describe God. And I think as you travel the world and you go through different communities and peoples, they may have described God differently. But I think when you listen and you connect, it's the same God. It's the same God.
Is there really have more communication here?
Yes. I'm not reading the rest of it. I'm fine to it. But I'll read it later, so.
That's right.
Okay. So, Shreya, could you please tell us a bit about the history and the general development of the Baha'i faith, so that for those that are listening, we can know what on earth we're talking about? Thank you so much.
Yes. Sure. So, I think before I start, I'd like to just point out that the information about the Baha'i faith is readily available online, and so I'd like to encourage people to read up about it if they're interested, you know? What I'm giving is really a snippet, right? What I can do justice to right now. So the Baha'i faith is a world religion, an independent world religion, that we say started in Persia, which is currently Iran, in 1844, by a messenger of God or a prophet that we call the Bab. His name, it means the gate in Arabic. He announced himself and he said that he was preparing the way for another messenger, a greater messenger, the promised one of all ages, the Qaim, if I'm saying it correctly. He taught that each person has an individual soul and can know God. He taught that prayer is connection to God. He connected people to each other through service and taught that humankind is one. And he was preparing them. The major focus of his revelation was to prepare them for the coming of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah at the time became one of his followers, accepted the teachings of the Bab. At that time, as you can imagine, teachings such as an individual's ability to connect with and to know God and understand religion, in the absence of clergy, the equality of women and men, women's rightful place in society, education for all, the unification of the human race. These were very attractive principles to many people connected with the hearts and with their minds, with their wishes for their future. A lot of people embraced the faith and began living their lives differently and working toward unity. But, as you can also imagine at the time, religious and secular or civil authorities were not as enthusiastic about the nature of these teachings and what it might imply, they believed, for their place, I suppose, in society and in life. The Bab and many of his followers were imprisoned, tortured. The Bab himself was executed in a public square in Tabriz in 1850. Baha'u'llah, along with the other followers, was also imprisoned and tortured. The Babis, the followers of the Bab, were persecuted continually as they continued to embrace the teachings and so on. While in prison, Baha'u'llah, at that time a follower of the Bab, was visited. He had a revelation, called her the Maid of Heaven, came to him and taught him things that he had not known. Everything he said, he came to know. And he came to know in this dark, deep dungeon prison that he was the promised one foretold by the Bab. Time passes, the persecution does not stop, and he is exiled along with a group of believers, and his family, children, women, along with him, were exiled. His exile continued, banishment to banishment to banishment throughout the Ottoman Empire. Baghdad, Constantinople, Adrianople, eventually Akka was his final destination, which was a perpetual imprisonment to the prison city of Akka. In those years, he declared himself as the promised one and announced to the world, in a way, that he was the promised one. And so began the Baha'i faith, the Baha'i cycle. He continued and added to the teachings of the Bab and wrote many, many volumes of these teachings, including prayers and treatises. As Barbara mentioned, he addressed kings and rulers. He wrote to religious leaders. He wrote to people. He answered questions. And the central teachings of the faith, the Baha'i faith, are unity. That there is one God, regardless of what you call him. He is the creator, the source of life. That he has sent religion as a way of connecting humankind to God and allowing us to go on this spiritual journey, and as individuals, but also in the collective. And that the way he sends this religion is through these manifestations of God. So from that, we have this unity of religion. This is a central principle of the Baha'i faith. We believe in all of the messengers of God that have gone before the Bab and Baha'u'llah. And then the unification of mankind, the unity of mankind. From that come certain principles as well. Universal education, equality of women and men, harmony of science and religion, prayer, service, and so on. So where are we now? We've arrived in Akka with Baha'u'llah. He passed away here. Before he passed away, though, he set the spot for the shrine of the Bab. And in his coming, this became the spiritual center as well as the administrative center of the Baha'i world. The Baha'i community continued to grow as the teachings were embraced by more and more in every country of the world right now. He passed away here in Israel, in Akka, at a place called Bashi. Right now, that's where the shrine of Baha'u'llah is, and it's a holy place for Baha'i. It's a place of pilgrimage. His son, Abdul Baha, became the head of the faith after that, and continued to share these teachings with the world and to unite the followers of the religion. That was his role as the head of the faith, really, to continue sharing these teachings, but also to find a way for, as we learn about them in Australia and Iran and Namibia and Zambia and Costa Rica, that we find a way of still ingathering and coming together, so we remain united. Some time later, the Baha'i world is now governed by the Universal House of Justice, whose seat is here in Haifa.
I'm curious to know, you talk about a lot of challenges that religion faced from the outside. Persecution and exile and torture and execution, horrible things. I'm curious to know though more on an internal level. It sounds to me like the aspirations of the Baha'i faith are really things that everyone can get behind. They're universal principles that everyone with a basic sense of decency should believe in. What are do you think, the internal challenges within us humans that stop us from coming to realize those visions that the Bab and Baha'u'llah shared?
Well, Baha'u'llah explains that every soul is on this journey, and that along this journey there will be tests. This is one aspect, that we will be tested. And tests can come in different forms, right? Some are our own tests, our own qualities perhaps, or our own perceptions that keep us from the truth. Others, as you mentioned, are externally imposed upon us. But in this journey, in this process of trying to overcome our tests, we suffer. That's one aspect. I think another thing that Baha'u'llah talks about is sacrifice. That there is something about sacrifice in this spiritual journey, this idea of giving something up in order to get something greater. I think one of the most interesting examples of sacrifice, yes, we see in this world is this birthing, right? As a mother gives birth, she sacrifices, even during pregnancy, a lot, it seems, right? It could be uncomfortable or painful, and it may seem, yes, it may seem like she's giving something up. But in essence, she's doing that in order to receive, in order to get something more. In the process, Baha'u'llah describes us as having this rational soul that is capable of eternal progress as we grow toward God. But that it is not like on and off or light and dark. It is a continuum. And so as we are learning justice, and we are getting tested, and we are sacrificing, and we are striving, we're on this process of continual growth. But it is also as a result of our will. Yes, human beings have a will. So in this journey, you have God's grace, you have God's mercy, you have life and others that can assist you. But in this journey, as you progress, it is your will. And often I think that is our strongest, I don't want to say opponent, but that is who we have to best.
Our boxing partner.
Our own self, yes, yes.
Okay. Actually, this was a question which I had for way later, but I actually want to just start with it, which is prayer in the Baha'i faith, right? Sometimes when people begin something, they start with an initiation of prayer. Is there a prayer? Is there a formal, verbal prayer? What does prayer look like for a Baha'i?
So, prayer is an integral part of Baha'i life. And we pray individually, we also pray as communities. Prayers were revealed by the Bab, by Baha'u'llah, and by Abdul-Baha. And so in our prayers, we would read or recite these prayers. There's no necessarily congregational prayer, and as we'll talk and you'll find out, there's no clergy in the Baha'i, so no one leads in the prayer. Prayer has been described by Baha'u'llah as conversation with God. It has been described as the sweetest gift you can give someone, right? To pray for them. We pray to God, as I mentioned, through these revealed prayers. And we pray in the shrines. This is one of the main reasons we come to the shrines, is to go and pray. We also have devotional gatherings in communities around the world. Where there is a Baha'i community, they will more than likely be hosting devotional gatherings that are open to all. To come and pray. We have prayers for praise and thanksgiving, prayers for detachment, healing, children, you name it, unity. And then another feature of prayer in our communities is wherever there is a house of worship. So in Australia, in Sydney, there is a house of worship, and that is a point of gathering for prayer. Do you have anything specific?
Did you feel like there would be an appropriate prayer to share for beginning this conversation? Is that something that one could do?
We could start with a prayer, yes.
Would you like to share a prayer?
I wish I could. I can't. Okay, so let's get around. O my God, unite the hearts of thy servants and reveal unto them thy great purpose. May they follow thy commandments and abide in thy law. Help them, O God, in their endeavors, and grant them strength to serve thee. O God, leave them not to themselves, but guide their steps by the light of thy knowledge, and cheer their hearts by thy love. Verily thou art their helper and their Lord.
Thank you. That was so beautiful. That was like, I felt like an angelic presence come through your words. That was really, it's so powerful to set an intention for something, to go into something with a purpose, with a meaning, with an explicit vision for something.
Yeah.
Right? Because so much of our day we're just caught up in madness. We never have a chance to center ourselves and to focus.
Yeah.
Varja and
Sharia. Yeah.
Varja and Sharia, I'm going to practice that. This is where
Vargo, actually.
Vargo and
What is
Sharia.
Is it sh or sh?
So it's English SH or CH.
I'm tempted to come up with nicknames for you guys.
Very Aussie
Story of
practice
our
as
life,
well.
right? Exactly.
Varga and Sharia. I'm curious to know, of the questions that we asked, were there any of them which were particularly interesting or which really raised your eyebrows or perked your ears? Varga, maybe you first.
No, not really. I was very happy to actually see some of the questions. I've recently worked on a couple of them for some papers, so I was actually happy to see them.
And Sharia, any of them perked your attention?
We were very interested in your interest in the questions. So if there are any that you'd like that for you are most interesting, I would say ask them maybe first.
That's awesome.
So we can delve
That's
into
really
them.
great. I like that turning.
But it's the truth. Like
Okay,
we
awesome.
talked about it and we said, well, what actually would be more interesting
Yeah.
to you?
So did either of you get a chance to check out our project, Seekers of Unity? Yes?
We really would love that.
Yeah, I saw something.
Nice, cool. So I'll tell you briefly what we're most interested in. We're most interested in the history and philosophy of mysticism. Mysticism is a very difficult word to define, and I'll probably actually turn it to you guys to share what the word means to you as well. I can see that you have a definition waiting to share. But the way that we use it basically, and you're welcome to share differing meanings of the word, this is a conversation as well, is the unitive experiences, theories, and practices of the world's traditions. So, and there's three, it's a scholarly definition which is borrowing, but it's unitive experiences where one feels a sense of unity, and that can be expressed differently, right? Between oneself and others, between oneself and God, oneself and nature, the theories that one uses to make sense of it, and the practices of how one moves themselves into that experience and how one goes living life based on those practices and theories. So, I'm most fascinated by the theories, by the metaphysics, by the philosophies and theologies that try and create a new story, a narrative of unity, right? Because there are so many theologies that are so popular that talk about a God who is like other and separate and far away, which means that we also are going to be separate and far away. But if we can have a unitive theory, a metaphysic that teaches instead of a dualism or a polarity, instead teaches a unity or a sort of monism or a monistic metaphysic, that's really what I'm interested in exploring. And that's a whole huge can of worms. And where that intersects with philosophy is where we get very excited. So there's like a religious component to it, there's a philosophical component to it. That's kind of where we approach things from. But also, we want to come to hear what you have to share. We're not coming here to like tell people what we think Baha'i is. We want to hear from the, excuse the phrase, but from the horse's mouth itself. That's the expression. So is there anything in what I just said that resonates or calls to attention?
No, I think it's a wonderful definition you've actually provided as well. So I think we discussed that I would take this question and I found it to be very, very fascinating. But it's one of those questions, just before Jorge arrived, I was telling Zabi that some of these questions are a bit more involved, perhaps, and there's no simple yes or no answer, or just a few statements. It probably is a concept that needs to be built on some foundation. So we need to, for example, talk about some writings, to talk about the Baha'i theology that bears on the question.
Great. So why don't we begin with that? Let's start right then.
I have some notes as well, which I'm hoping to refer to for some of these more involved.
So I guess the question, and to phrase it formally, is what relationship do you understand there to be between mysticism and the Baha'i faith?
So the short answer, I think, there is that the Baha'i faith is essentially mystic in character, but very much depends on how you approach mysticism and how you define mysticism. As you said, there is not a universal agreement on the definition of mysticism. So by nature, any definition of mysticism would be stipulative. I think for the purposes of this conversation, it might be useful to also approach mysticism as a constellation of practices, writings and texts and discourses and traditions and experiences and institutions that together facilitate the acquisition of divine knowledge, if you may, or spiritual transformation, and allows for the movement or spiritual journey or spiritual quest towards the unveiling of truth. And I think because of this approach or this definition, then it will become important to touch on each of these elements.
Yes.
So the Baha'i texts, perhaps that bear on the concept of mysticism or the concept of institutions, or what Baha'i practices there might be that may be similar or different from mystic practices.
Fantastic. I love the broadness and expansiveness of that definition, because it really is all those things. It's the techniques, it's the communities, it's the texts, it's the practices, all which move towards a shared goal.
Yeah.
And having that definition allows us to begin to compare and begin to ask real questions. So thank you for opening up that definition.
Of course. But then, because of that, I think that this discussion will be quite long as well to really address all of those aspects of
I brought my sleeping bag, so I can sleep. We can have a nap when the sun goes down. We can sleep in the morning.
I'm worried about the batteries on your mouse.
So where would you like to begin?
We could talk about text, maybe.
Please.
So, as I said, the Baha'i faith is fundamentally mystic in character. One aspect of it is the writings of the Prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah. Between the years 1854 to 1856, Baha'u'llah withdrew to the mountains of Kurdistan for 2 years, and he lived a life of seclusion and solitude and reflection that is reminiscent of Moses' experience of his withdrawal to Mount Sinai, similar to the 40 days and nights of Jesus' seclusion in the desert, and also Muhammad's period of withdrawal to the cave in Mount Hira. During this period, Baha'u'llah lived among mystics of various orders, and he, with his divine knowledge, elucidated some of the most difficult and most abstruse questions that those mystics had. For example, he talked about some difficult questions that they had about Ibn Arabi's Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah, and that really left a great impression upon those mystics. At their request, he also wrote a poem along the same meter and length and style of Ibn Farid's Al-Qasida al-Ta'iyya. So because of that, they developed great reverence towards Baha'u'llah. During that period and a bit and after, among his early writings, you can see many mystical texts. They include, for example, the hidden words, the four valleys, gems of divine mysteries. These are titles of some of his works. Ode of the Dove, for example. Clouds from realms above, the seven valleys, the Book of Certitude, the Tablet of all food. There are many of his works, and this is just really a few of some of his early works that are mystical in character. And in those works, he touched on many mystical concepts like the presence of God, union with God, the features and characteristics of the different stages of mystic quest and the spiritual quest, the requisite characters of each step. He talked about this arc of descent and arc of ascent, for example. He talked about the concept of manifestation versus emanation. So many concepts that are essential in mysticism. But what's important, I think, to note is that these writings are, like any other text, are highly contextual. So he revealed them just as sometimes in some of his later writings, he speaks in the voice of a lawgiver. Sometimes he has revealed poems and he speaks as a poet. Sometimes he addresses specialists in a field. For example, he addresses religious clerics or he addresses politicians. These mystic writings are also revealed in response to specific questions from specific individuals in a certain time. So they are not devoid of that context. Because of that, they are not meant, I would say, as universal exhortations to prescribe a concrete, mystical practice. I think that's quite important to frame it in the right context.
Could you then? That's really fantastic. That was really brilliant. Could you? I'm really interested in contextualizing the mystical traditions of the world, both understanding them in their universality and understanding their particularity, right? Because there's a foundation of unity to establish, and on that foundation of unity, we can then ask questions of particularity and diversity and beauty within that unity. So I would love if you could contextualize the teachings of Baha'u'llah within the context of the mystical traditions that he's coming and speaking to and interacting with. A bit of historical and theological contextualization would be great.
Sure. I think naturally in that process I could draw on some of the practices
Fantastic.
that are conventionally known or have conventionally defined mysticism, and also experiences that are perhaps promulgated in the Baha'i writings and so on. So I could say that, as I just explained, these mystical writings of Baha'u'llah are not meant to be universal prescriptions of mystical practice, because they're highly contextualized and they were in response to certain individuals at a given time. But this does not mean that there is no mystic practice in the Baha'i faith. In fact, in one sense, the whole practice of the Baha'i faith could be defined as a mystical practice. And that is because the ultimate objective of the Baha'i faith is to enable and facilitate that individual and social, collective, spiritual transformation. It is to allow, and indeed it encourages, the journey of the soul towards discovery and unveiling of truth. And really, all of Baha'i teachings, in a sense, are about encouraging the purification and spiritualization of self in order to achieve and attain divine characters and spiritual attributes. So in that sense, we can say the practice of the Baha'i faith as a whole is in fact a mystic practice. So there might be then some point of difference between conventional mystic traditions, some of them, in which the practice of mysticism is perhaps limited sometimes to sometimes an inner circle who are in the know, who have access to that esoteric knowledge.
Yes.
Sometimes there are institutions, and in some mystic orders, those institutions that regulate perhaps mysticism are highly hierarchical. In the Baha'i faith, there are no hierarchies or institutions that regulate the practice of mysticism, in fact, because the practice of the Baha'i faith itself can be described to be a mystic practice. It's for everyone. So everyone is welcome, everyone is encouraged, everyone is expected to practice the teachings and the laws of the Baha'i faith. There are also, I think, in some mystic orders and traditions, you can see that there is a heavy reliance on monasticism, for example, or on seclusion, on practices that can be defined as deprivation or mortifications or asceticism. In the Baha'i faith, we don't have these kind of practices. In fact, Baha'is, in their mystic journey or spiritual journey, are encouraged to associate with the community, with the society, and through service to society, through the practice of unity and their active labor in bringing about universal peace and unity of mankind. It is in that process that they purify their soul, if you may, or unveil the truth, or experience the spiritual feelings. So there is also that element of conventional defined practices that were there, and some of the teachings that Baha'u'llah has brought to to emphasize. So the emphasis of the practice, to some extent, has changed in the writings of Baha'u'llah.
It's really fascinating. I feel like we've dived right headfirst into the topic here. Actually, I think there's a good segue here to connect both of the streams of conversation which we've been having, which is that the journey of the human towards perfection, towards unity, towards manifesting the divine characteristics, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like that there's a way in which humans can move towards this perfection of being, which perhaps is embodied by the prophets and the messengers, which is a reflection of the divine, but perhaps in some sense they become, and this may be a very mystical thing, they become more than just representations of the divine, but actually manifestations of the divine. Is that something that's in the Baha'i faith? I'd like to hear from both of you on this, actually, because I feel like it's something that we're both converging on.
Yes, this is perhaps another involved topic, I think, because it draws on our understanding of God's revelation, perhaps, and the role of manifestations. Would you like to talk to it first, or would you like me to talk to it?
Go ahead. You want to start? Or
I don't mind. However,
No, you start. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Please, go ahead.
Do you know, I want to play a game at one point. We'll put one of you out of the room, we'll get the answer from one, then we'll bring the other,
We'll identical.
we'll have each one draw something, we'll reveal the camera. That's how you test witnesses, right?
Yeah.
Well, feel free to jump in
Yeah.
anytime. Well, in Baha'i faith we believe that God is absolutely transcendent and He is unknowable. But He reveals Himself to the world of creation in Baha'is belief in an emanational process. So everything that exists in the world of creation receives a portion of the bounties and bestowals of God according to its rank and place in the stage of existence and in the process of creation. But the first thing that emanates from God, the first emanation, also known as the first intellect, or the primal will, or the Holy Spirit, perhaps, or the Word of God, is the reality of the manifestations of God. So Baha'is believe that this is a pre-existent emanation from God, and manifestations. So this reality is single, and is pre-existent, and in its connection with the world of God or with the divine, is not bound or is not limited to the bounds of time or place, and is not plural, but it is associated progressively with different prophets or messengers, or essentially chosen members of the human race. Baha'is refer to them as manifestations of God. These individuals are special chosen individuals. It's not like through knowledge or through spiritual quest or through a mystic practice we could aspire to become like manifestations of God or messengers or prophets. The reason is, in them, Baha'is believe that the Holy Spirit is associated with the human spirit. So in them there is a connection with the world of God, a divine connection, and there is a connection with the world of creation. That is essentially their individuality. They are like true mirrors that reflect all the bounties and perfections and the names and attributes of God. Everything in the world of creation also reflects, to some extent, the bounties and perfections and the names and attributes of God. Everything that is created, because they emanate from God. But Baha'is believe that they differentiate between emanation and manifestation. I think that is a critical distinction to make.
Can we pause before that distinction? But I do want to continue with that. I'm curious to know this. The language that you're using and the metaphysics that you're employing to explain the Baha'i faith, I'm curious to know how aware within the Baha'i, because the Baha'is believe in a process of free inquiry, how much it is connected and rooted to other mystical traditions that geographically perhaps influenced the Baha'i faith. We actually just came back from interviewing the Druze, and the Druze have a very fascinating relationship with Ismaili Islam, which has a relationship with Neoplatonism. And Neoplatonism, which goes on to inspire a lot of Western forms of philosophical mysticism, has a concept of the nous, or the word, or the wisdom, which is the first emanation, which then emanates the world soul, which then emanates the world. How much of this comparative mysticism is something which you guys study or are aware of? Because the exact speech that you just gave could have been given by a Neoplatonist 2,000 years ago, and that's an incredible thing. I think that points to some sort of shared truth here.
And I think the reason for that perhaps is that Baha'is believe the foundations of all divine religions is the same, that the foundation is one. So, and this is part of that, the foundational aspect and the spiritual aspect of revelation and religion that we see in different religions. But I think you had also asked a question about progressive revelation, yes, and we can of course address it a bit further, that as well, because there is a universal aspect to religions and there is a temporal aspect to religions. The foundational or universal part is the same, is fixed, like the ethical parts of religion, yes, or the golden rule.
Yes.
And there is a temporal part that changes because as a religion relates to time and place and exigencies and requirements. Won't be surprised that many of these mystic teachings are essentially at the very core of religion. They're part of the universal aspect of each revelation. Baha'u'llah's texts heavily draw on and glorify many notable mystics of the time, like Ibn Arabi, for example. And of course, it's because of the context in which the Baha'i faith was born and the interaction of those texts to their general context, if you may. So many of those concepts repeat themselves. I think hence the similarity.
Yes. Is there a space within Baha'i communities today, perhaps here by what's it called, the house of the book, the shrine of the book, where the library is kept, where the research is done? What's the name of that building here?
Archives?
There's a research building, right? The Center for the Study of the Text, that's the one. Is there a place for the study of comparative mysticism in this form, looking at the ideas from Ibn Arabi, looking at how they were shared and influenced, perhaps updated or changed by? Is there such a thing going on?
Well, within here as a specific focus program, probably not. I'm not sure. I'm not aware of any. But I think there are individual Baha'is, particularly, that are interested, know that to look at this from the perspective of the Baha'i teachings, to look at the comparative aspect of it.
We're going to have to speak to someone. We have to set up a comparative mysticism study center. Someone's going to take care of that when we're back next. So, is there anything you want to add to what Vafa just shared?
No, I think he treated it very nicely, yeah.
Was there?
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, in one's own experience, the striving towards being a mirror of the divine, is that something that ordinary humans can aspire to and can strive towards, even though we can't achieve it with our own works? It's a gift of grace. But is it something that an ordinary human, or is it just kept for special souls or something like that?
Like, should we strive toward perfection?
Is it a potentially achievable goal for any human?
It is a goal. It should be a goal. Will we achieve it? God willing.
Is there a doctrine of gradations of souls, that different souls can get further in their journey, and is there anything of that nature in Baha'i?
That, like, predetermined, they will get further than someone else?
Or have the potential to get further.
Different from someone else?
Yes. Is there such an idea?
Interesting question.
Because this does pop up in mystical traditions where there are, like, bronze, silver, gold souls.
No, I don't think.
No.
I mean, I haven't heard. I don't think there is such. But everyone is encouraged, and in fact, I think expected, because that's the purpose of our creation, really, isn't it? To strive towards that excellence in every aspect. And I think the spiritual journey and the mystic quest, I think, it's for everyone. Some might go further and be more advanced, and some might be busy with other requirements of life and not advance as much. But I don't think it's predetermined, at least according to.
Yeah, according to my understanding, exactly. Yeah. We all start out.
Sure, how far are you down the path? I'm a big
Every day.
I'm a big believer that there's a mutual space for comedy and spirituality. So don't take anything that I'm saying flippantly. I take these things very seriously. So if we're striving to emulate God, sure, I'm going to direct this to you. We have to have some kind of idea of what God is, or what it's like, that we can emulate that thing which is God. So how would you describe what God is, what that thing that we're striving towards is?
Oh, wow. So, my understanding in the Baha'i faith, we are striving toward God. But as we mentioned, He's unknowable. And the way that we do get to know what we know of God is through religion, and it's through these manifestations of God. So, one way that we can identify and understand what it is we're striving toward is to look at the lives of these manifestations. In the Baha'i faith, it was further elucidated that we should look toward the example of Abdul-Baha. This is who, even as our children are growing up, we say, well, look to the example of Abdul-Baha, inasmuch as he embodied the spiritual perfections that a human being can attain. These manifestations of God, you know how Varga was describing their emanations, yes? One analogy that Baha'u'llah uses in the writings is that of the sun. And he describes God as the sun and mankind as, the earth or the universe. And this sun is a life-giving force. It is full of light, it is full of warmth and heat, and it is the source of life. How is it that this planet receives the light and warmth and life-giving force of the sun? The sun does not come to the earth itself, right? These rays of the sun come. And as they come, they bring the qualities of the sun with them. And that is how we experience the sun, and that's how we live from the sun. So these manifestations of God, these messengers of God, are these rays. These are these rays. In the writings of the Baha'i faith, this is how God is described, yes? As creator, as parent, as healer, as all-knowing, as omniscient, as the protector. In the prayers, some of the prayer that I shared, and in all of the prayers, the qualities of God are named. He's described. Beyond that, I think the religious teachings are quite, I don't want to say clear, but I think really it's quite clear what we should be striving toward in our efforts to mirror God, right? Like, love each other. We're told, like, the guidance is quite clear. Tell the truth. Strive, sacrifice, pray, serve. And it's through this we manifest the qualities of God.
Can I ask a pointed question? Referring to God, you mentioned that God is He.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. I did.
Is God, first, before I get to the question of gender, would God best be described as a person or a principle? Does that make sense, that question?
Can you?
Yes, because actually, before we ask that question, can we just do a battery check? Make sure we're all good, or we need to plug anything in? So let's pick up with that question of, and I'll explain what I mean by person and principle, and then I want to pick up Varga on the question of emanation versus manifestation.
All right.
Ready for that one? So, and then we have a surprise question for Salma at the end.
Really? Magically edited out.
That's the 11th question. So, God in some, let's say, more theistic forms of religion is described with terms of personality. God is relational. God hears and answers. God chooses to create. God gets angry and forgives. And in some traditions, more philosophical traditions, God is a principle. God is, let's say, Neoplatonism, the one that overflows and emanates without really choosing to do so. It's the ground of being, or being itself. These are not personal things. These are metaphysical things, these principles. In the Baha'i faith, and I'm hearing bits of personality and bits of principality. Would you say God is more person or more principle, or neither or both?
Oh my goodness. I feel like I want to think about this. And I want to ask Varga to chime in.
Please, no, we encourage thinking. It's definitely take your time.
Could you start?
I could start, and again we have
And I'll
feel free to
think
jump in.
how to
Yes,
answer
sure. Yeah, I think the most important principle that we read in Baha'i writings is that God is unknowable in its true sense of the term. So God is not describable. He is not accessible. He is ineffable. Whatever we describe is in relation to what we feel of our interaction with things that have emanated from Him or that reflect His name and attributes in this world of creation, and according to our limited understanding. And whatever we describe is subject to the limitation of language.
Yes.
So if we call Him He, for example, it's purely because of the limitation of language, because we have to use some sort of pronoun or some sort of word to describe Him. It's just inevitable.
Is there a reason why the male pronoun was chosen instead of the female pronoun?
I don't think it means anything, to be honest, because when we say God is indescribable, then it doesn't matter what you say after that. It's purely our imagination. And it's also, we learn in the Baha'i writings that there is a clear difference between our imagination and what God really is. So we can, for the sake of our understanding, distinguish between how God really is in the realm of God and what we understand God to be through our interaction with His reflections in the world of creation. And obviously they are different. Whatever we imagine, at best we can imagine something and call it to be our God. But obviously imagination is our creation. It is not our creator. So that is, I think, a very important distinction.
Shireen?
I mean, the only thing I can add, building off of what Varga has said, really is this idea of God being indescribable. We cannot fully understand God at all, ever, and yet we can all know God. As Baha'is, we believe that God has revealed Himself to all of humanity throughout our history. There is not a people in the world that He has denied His bounty, that He has denied His connection. And of all the histories and geographies and societies that we come from, the languages we speak, the cultures we practice, the histories we come from, we all know this God. And I think, we are totally limited in our ability to describe God. And I think as you travel the world and you go through different communities and peoples, they may have described God differently. But I think when you listen and you connect, it's the same God. It's the same God. You know, my parents are from two different places, and they talk about the histories and how religion is passed, through generations. Like my father is from a tribe in Namibia that are oral traditionists. So they pass tradition on orally. And the way they use words that English doesn't even have to describe reality and history and to connect things. But they've known God, the same God that my mother's people all the way across the oceans. No? That's all that I can add.
Yeah, it's quite something. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah.
It really is. I'm curious. I really do want to ask this question of emanation and manifestation, but I'm curious actually just to switch our hats a little here, because the Baha'i faith to me seems like a really perfect faith. Like if you had to create your own religion, you can imagine creating something like Baha'i. It's really it's really, really great. I'm going to ask a critical question. Someone's watching. If there was one thing that you could change about the Baha'i faith, if there is one thing, what might it be? One thing that you feel could be corrected, could be changed, that if you had the power to, you would make that change? Unless it's a difficult question because you have to switch hats now instead of advocating for it, to think critically about.
I mean, I think it's a tricky question, because I think part of why the Baha'i faith seems like the perfect religion now, because what I believe is that it was made for now. I do believe as a Baha'i that if I was alive in the time of Christ, what he was teaching would seem like the perfect religion now. In the time of Muhammad, the same thing. In the time of the Bab, I hope, it's my hope, right, that I would connect with the messenger of God at that time. The time of Krishna and Buddha. So that's kind of why it's hard for me to, I think that observation, I think it's true.
Varga, if there was one thing that you could change about the Baha'i faith.
Yeah, I think
You have a ticket right now straight to the Supreme Council. Veto, what would it be?
I think the question is personal, but the answer, I think, is a matter of principle, really. I don't think there could be a personal answer, and I think, as Shreya explained beautifully, that all religions are perfect. And I don't think if we believe that all of these religions have a divine source, who knows what is good for us, who has created us, then it is not for anyone to change, the divine guidance. So I personally wouldn't change anything about any religion.
That's right. This answer is consistent with the idea of progressive revelation. Right? I'm getting the image. Excuse me if this is a bit sacrilegious, but you have like an iPhone, it gets an upgrade every few months. You get the new software. So we as humanity, we get a new download every.
Software update.
It's a good one. If the Baha'i faith uses that analogy, I want credit.
You get credit.
Tell us a bit about the difference between emanation and manifestation.
Sure. I think the concept of emanation and manifestation come into picture when we discuss the process of revelation.
Yes.
And the creation, really. So,
do both of you have water, by the way?
Yeah.
Both
yes,
hydrated?
thank you. Yes.
Please, we don't want anyone dehydrated.
Yeah.
Yes, so tell us then about revelation. Let's take it back a step.
Yeah, so Baha'is believe that everything emanates from God, but they do not manifest God. And it's good to define and distinguish them. So emanation, by way of an example, is how when I'm speaking, my speech emanates from me. My soul or my mind or my body is not consumed as I'm talking to you. It does not dissolve into particles, right? So the speech emanates from a speaker. Or when I write something, the product or the text is an emanation from my pen.
Without destroying, without affecting you.
Yes, it doesn't consume. I suffer no decrease or pain when I do that. But manifestation is appearance. So for example, when a seed turns into a tree, the seed will be no longer because it is consumed and it changes shape and it takes the form of the fruits and the twigs and the leaves. So that's the difference. So Baha'is
would say that's manifestation.
That's manifestation or appearance. And Baha'is believe that the process of revelation, whether revelation in its general sense, so appearance of everything, let us say reflection or emanation of everything from God, is a process of emanation, but also the revelations that we describe as religion. So the first emanation, if you may, or the first intellect, or the primal will, or the reality of messengers and prophets, that also emanates from God. So nothing in the world of creation, no matter if it's a part of the mineral kingdom or it's the manifestations of God, nothing embodies God in the sense that God descends and appears in their form. So there is no incarnation, let's say, in the Baha'i belief. There is no, anthropomorphism, that God appears in the form of any created being.
Is there anything in creation which is a manifestation of God then?
Manifestation in its, if it means here manifestation in its generic sense of emanation.
No, in the technical sense.
In the technical sense of appearance,
Yes.
No, absolutely not. So Baha'is believe that God is absolutely transcendent, which means there is no immanent aspect to God, absolutely. And I understand that the concept of immanence is a useful concept in certain contexts, but in the process of revelation, creation, and our interaction and relationship with God, Baha'is believe that God is absolutely transcendent, which means He is absolutely single, He is simple, He is non-delimited, as in there is no association with Him, and He's incorporeal, so He is purely immaterial.
So this opens a fascinating question, which is the distinction between most religions in theology, which makes a tradition either theistic or mystical, is that there is some sense of immanence in the theology, which allows it to be a union, a presence, a connection. Because if there is no immanence, if God is totally and utterly transcendent, then there's no coming close to God, there's no reaching God, there's no encountering God, there's no knowing God if God is absolutely transcendent. So how does the Baha'i faith eradicate that doctrine of divine immanence and still hold on to a tradition which you wanted to self-describe as mystical, where one can come to and encounter the divine? I think this is a very puzzling issue here.
This is, yes, and you've asked the million-dollar question. This is the question that has, I think, baffled humanity. It poses paradoxes to a collective, I think, spiritual quest of humanity since the beginning of time. It has always been this question. On the one hand, we are promised the presence of God. And the other, we say, and we, a collective humanity, I'm referring to, we say that God is inaccessible. On the one hand, we say that we can find the signs of God in everything. On the other, we say that God has an essential distinction with His creation. So how to solve this question, I think, is a very important question. As you described, that Baha'is believe in the absolute transcendence of God, and that poses some difference, I think, with some other, perhaps, traditions. I think that's also an involved question. I think we have to somehow build the foundation. What is interesting is that the question of the concept of absolute transcendence is understood by human mind in a very interesting way. Because if we say God is absolutely transcendent, full stop, then we are saying that God has nothing to do with humanity. That God does not need humanity, and we cannot interact with God. That God cannot be worshipped. That God cannot be obeyed. To human mind, that concept is very similar to the concept of non-existence. And I think somehow we have to tackle this paradox. The short answer is the Baha'i faith explains this historic paradox and solves it through the concept of the manifestation of God. That's such a pivotal concept, I think, to all the teachings of the Baha'i faith. And that is, manifestations of God reflect all the names and attributes and perfections of God in their true sense, like a perfect mirror facing the sun. And I think we can take a step back still to explain when Baha'is say that God is unknowable and indescribable and ineffable and inaccessible, they mean as God is, truly is, in the world of God. In the world of God, God does not even have any names and attributes. And this is all speculation because we are talking about it in the world of creation. If God does have names and attributes in the world of God, then they must be identical with His essence, because God is absolutely one, the absolute singleness or absolute oneness in the world of God. But what happens is that in the process of revelation, everything emanates from God, and to some extent they carry some names and attributes of God, some sign of God. And what is interesting is we can find a way to the divine bounties and divine grace and the reflections of God through everything and through everyone that is around us. And I think that is an important point of unity. And that has some mystic sense to it as well, which is quite interesting. In one sense, we can say because of that process of emanation and universal revelation, everything reflects some signs of God. So God can be found in a limited sense, in the world of creation, in everything and everywhere. So that is a strong, I think, mystic element perhaps that existed. But above all, and I think in its truest sense, God can be found in its true reflection in the manifestations of God that are chosen members of the human race.
So let me pause you there. Somebody got us an astute theologian. Well done. Good person, good casting job here.
10 on 10.
10 out of 10. So,
I need to make coffee.
someone should make you a coffee, Selma. Would you guys like a coffee, either of you? Okay.
No, serious.
I'm a professional barista, by the way. I can make it.
Ah.
I better not make myself coffee.
She's like,
Here, I want to pull you back to something that you just said earlier. I assume that you're using the word manifestation now in a technical sense. And previously we said that in a technical sense there are no manifestations in reality. So how can we reconcile the paradox of God's transcendence, almost to the point of non-existence, with the concept of manifestations if you just told us that there are no manifestations?
To make it very clear, manifestations of God also emanate from God. The reality of the manifestation of God, so that first emanation, or the primal will, or the word of God, that also emanates from God. Nothing manifests God.
Okay.
But so that is the technical sense. But manifestation of God is a term that Baha'is use to describe the perfect human being, or the chosen member of the human race, or the prophets, or the messengers. And that is a generic use of the term manifestation.
I see.
It does not mean that God incarnates in them.
I see.
Or
So when you use the term manifestation the second time, you're using it colloquially.
yes, as manifestations of God. In that sense, in the sense of manifestations of God, meaning prophets and messengers, they do not manifest God.
Gotcha.
Yes, they reflect.
So the what's referred to in the colloquial sense as the manifestations of God are just perfect or near perfect reflections, which are emanations of God. The question then, to not let you off so easily, is if you have a radical ontological break, that there's no relation between God in God's world, as you use the phrase, and whatever comes out from that, so the emanated, is only reflections of God. There's still, even if the reflections are able to tell something of the characteristics of what was shining forth, like the rays of the sun can tell something of the sun, there's still, there's like almost a line that cannot be crossed into the realm of the divine. And the human is forever exiled from the divine realm. And we can look at the reflections from today to tomorrow and try emulating and try copying, even find perfect emulations, but there's no way to actually be in relationship or possess knowledge that unifies the knower and the known, or to have an experience of love that goes over that boundary. I'm not sure if a term of love is used between the human and God in Baha'i faith.
yes.
These things are all impossible if all we're, have available to us are just perfect reflection, even perfect reflections. Is there, how would that be?
Yes, Baha'is believe that there is absolutely no direct tie of intercourse with God. Absolutely not. We know everything that we know of God through His perfect mirrors, through manifestations of God. Baha'u'llah has explained in his writings that to know manifestations of God is equivalent to knowing God, and that is the closest we can come to having any relationship with God. Otherwise, Baha'is believe very clearly that there is absolutely no direct relationship with God. In fact, in our daily obligatory prayer, we testify to this every day. That is something that we repeat.
I'm curious to know what. Yes.
Yes, so when you pray directly to God, that's not a direct relationship with Him.
So even in the writings, we are encouraged to address God through His manifestations. That our prayers will be more effective if they are addressed to God through His manifestations, because we have absolutely no understanding of what God is.
Summer, I love the fact that you brought a question. I know. I love that this is, and this piece was a conversation. I mean that genuinely. And I think that question is very good, because even if we are praying to or through the manifestations, if it's never able to cross over into the divine realm, right, then we're praying with a glass ceiling, right? Which might be a double entendre there because of the masculine language. But is there a space where in the Baha'i faith one can break through? Because what you find in many mystical traditions is that there is a limit where the human traditionally goes, but then there is something which breaks that, which ruptures that break between the human and God, and there is a place for them to actually encounter. Is there anything of that sort?
No, and what you describe is, I think, essentially the ultimate objective of the mystic quest in its conventional or traditional sense. And I think that is perhaps one point of major difference between the conventional understanding of mysticism and the Baha'i approach to the mystic and spiritual quest, that there is no unity of experience with God in the Baha'i faith. But the reason Baha'is believe that the manifestations of God are true mirrors is because of their twofold station, if you may. So Baha'is believe that manifestations of God have a station of essential unity or divine unity in their connection with the divine realm, and they have also a station of distinction. That is their individuality. Because of that, in one sense, you can say that our connection with the manifestation of God is equivalent to our connection with God, because through the manifestation we feel all the perfections and attributes and names of God.
So let's get very clear here, because this is something which I'm very interested in. The manifestations of God. I just said two different things. One was that what differentiates Baha'i mysticism from others is that there is no real unitive encounter, and then you wanted to say that the manifestations are in a state of unity with the divine, which is common of the way that Neoplatonists perhaps speak of nous and the divine. How do we reconcile those two things that you just said?
So, not in the sense of mystic unity of experience. I think that unity, the essential unity, is in the sense that they are the first emanation from God. Right, so the reality of the manifestations of God. And that their knowledge is made to be equivalent with the knowledge of God. There is a connection with the divine realm, but it does not mean that the manifestations of God come from the world of God, whatever it might mean, because it's indescribable. But at some, language fails us here, because even if we say at some point the reality of the manifestation of God is created, we are necessarily imposing a concept of time to the creation, whereas we believe that the reality of the manifestation...
These realities of manifestation, are they seen as emanated or emanators?
That's a very interesting question, both. So the reality of the manifestation of God emanates from God, in fact. Is first emanation, but not in the sense of timing first, because it's also pre-existent. Yes. But the whole creation comes into being through that reality. So, in fact, you can say that reality of manifestation of God, the Word of God, or the prime will of God, is what creates the rest of the creation.
So there's a what we would refer to perhaps technically as a metaphysical hypostasis, which is both emanator and emanated. Something which is very, very common in mystical traditions, because we really need that hypostasis to make sense of that relationship. Here's going to be a technical question from the other side to try and pull the edges on what you're saying. A mystical tradition which affirms a real ontological distinction, a real distinction in being between the emanator and emanated, between God and world, as you're proposing, needs to make sense of the existence of the world. Does the world itself have in an independent, external existence to God? Is there something other than God that actually exists? Does the world exist? Does it not exist? If it does exist, is it part of God? Is it not God? This is a very common metaphysical question for mystical traditions. I'm curious to know within the Baha'i faith how that may be sliced and diced.
Yes, I think then we can refer to explain this question. We can refer to two types of existence. I think there is existence in its general sense of the term, that everything that we see around us exists, right? But there is an existence which is the true existence, or the only existence in a specific sense. That is the existence of God. So this existence that we see around us in the world of creation is as non-existent when compared to that existence. I think that's perhaps we can just differentiate between the two senses of the term existence to explain it.
Is there an embracing of a doctrine? And I'm curious to know how much this is esoteric and how much this reaches a more broader audience of a theory and philosophy that would perhaps be best called acosmism, that the world does not really exist, that the world is illusory, at least in relation to God. Is that a doctrine which is accurate and which filters down
within the Baha'i faith?
Yes.
This is a Baha'i teaching. Yes, Abdul Baha, in Some Answered Questions, the volume of a compilation of his talks, Some Answered Questions, in fact, talks about this, to differentiate between the two types of existence. He's asked a question about the unity of existence. There's a school of thought that some theosophists believe in, that's the unity of existence. And someone is asked, do Baha'is believe in the unity of existence? And Abdullah explains it by differentiating between the two types of existence. That the general existence that we talk about, is an addition to the substance, is not the truth of the substance. Whereas the true existence that we talk about is the reality of God. And that's why these two existences cannot be compared. They refer to two different things.
I'm curious to know, is this an idea which filters into general education, that there's a distinction, that there's an existential differentiation and lack of real being to the real world? Is that something which filters through?
No, I think quite the opposite. Sorry, I'm feeling it on this question.
I'll come in.
Yes, please.
Because I'm very curious to know both technical theology and also theology as it's understood by the broad community, because I think there's a very important relationship between those two.
And I think there is perhaps a mystic angle to this as well, because it's, I think, common among some mystic orders that there is that the world is viewed perhaps as a hindrance to the mystic quest sometimes, or as an obstacle. There is among some mystic thoughts, there is some degree of anti-worldliness. And the Baha'i idea of the world is quite opposite. I think we are encouraged to live in the world. Everything that we are supposed to do in our spiritual quest towards acquiring divine wisdom and unveiling of truth and divine attribution is done in this world. So we are encouraged, for example, to have...
I'm curious, why would that be the case if theologically the position is that the world itself does not have true existence, that it's illusory in comparison to God? It would seem like the theology would instead push one towards...
It's not illusory. I think we have to say it has a real existence, but that existence compared to the true existence. An example could be, an example that I mentioned, the rays of the sun. We get a portion of the rays of the sun, but it's not comparable to the light at the source. So I think it's a comparative difference, I think, between the two types of existence that we say.
Is there any moment in Baha'i history where that thinking does push people away from embodied spiritual practice and towards more ascetic, escapist, mystical practice? Does that happen in Baha'i history?
Individuals are free to have different experiences and practices, but this is not a Baha'i teaching. that specifically prescribes certain mystic practices or experiences, so certain experiences are not regulated or stimulated in order to create a mystic experience through that process of being detached or separated from this world, if it makes sense. I think the closest experience that we can say is the state of prayer. And Baha'is do pay attention to, praying in quiet, perhaps at night, in privacy, when they're free of daily cares, in order to bring about that condition that is perhaps more, conducive to that, to that spiritual rapture and attention.
Yes. Sheree, what do you make of all this?
As you all were talking, I was just thinking that a real focus of the Baha'i faith and one of its foundational principles is this idea of humankind being here as the creation of God. We have been created, but not just created. We have been created to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization, are the words. We have been created to know and love God. We have been created to serve humanity. So we are definitely created and living in a world with a purpose and with an intention to do something with our lives while here, and that we will continue, the soul goes on. So I think, on the one hand, well, no, it's not on the one hand, we strongly believe that we have two parts, spiritual and material, and that in this world, they're both alive and connected in our body, our soul, and we are advancing like that. But anything, and even in our totality, all of us, you go back in history and go forward to the future, when compared to God, sum us all up, we're as nothing. And I think that's that existence and non-existence. When compared with the ultimate,
it's a humbling belief.
It's absolutely humbling.
Is there a space to experience that belief, to experience the nothingness of human existence within our own lives?
I think every day.
Yes. No? How?
Vara explained, there's prayer. Yes, when we pray, we submit, we try to submit.
Is there a practice of self-nullification? Is that something which, to feel is there something like that? To feel the emptiness of our own existence in comparison to the real existence of God?
I think through prayer, it's, by focusing our attention on the words, perhaps, that we utter as we are praying, with the purity of motive, with the attraction of heart, or, that rupture of spirit. Yes, so we can do that, but not... that doesn't have to be a physical practice. So the Baha'i faith does not have a physical or a sensory practice in order to bring that about, because the knowledge can be acquired, and I think perhaps that's a question of how we can really acquire certain types of knowledge. We can through our senses, but we can also through intellectual and discursive reasoning. But we can also through intuitive knowledge and learning, and through mystical knowledge, we can also receive that knowledge. But they're not dependent necessarily on each other. Because I think one common theme, perhaps, again, among some mystics, is that in order to get spiritual or mystic experience or knowledge, we have to practice or regulate or deprive our senses. Baha'is believe that that's not necessarily so. Without the practice or regulation or deprivation of senses, we can have discursive knowledge, intellectual knowledge. And without both, we can also have, through the bounty of God, perhaps, we could have, some aspect of intuitive knowledge or inspiration or divine.
Through reflection on the emanations of God.
Yes, through the words of the manifestation of God, whose knowledge is equivalent.
Instead
to
of
knowledge.
closing us off from those.
I was actually asking Barak about what happens after death if you can enter the presence of God after death.
That's a great question.
Yeah, but he was saying that the presence of God after death is also synonymous with the presence of the manifestation of God. And then the question was, what happens to the manifestation of God? Do they enter the presence? They also don't enter. So they enter the presence of themselves?
Look, I think that because after death, what happens is that our
We don't
soul
have
is not associated with this body, physical body here anymore. But the question of presence of God is not a question of material or spiritual existence. It's a matter of station, I think. So whatever we do and in whatever world we move to, our station is a human station. We won't even reach the station of the manifestations of God, let alone the station.
There's an interesting notion in Neoplatonism, which there's a lot of elements. This comes straight through Sufism, where one can ascend the ladder, the chain of being of emanations, into the manifestations, and the manifestations themselves, the now's tones to God, and can somehow, like the analogy often uses the chain of Jacob, Jacob's ladder. Is there a sense that humans can climb or descend that ladder?
I think that clear focus on the absolute distinction between the station of God and the world of creation
It's always maintained.
Yes, always maintained, because God is described as that necessary being who is single, who is simple, who is incorporeal, and us, the world of creation, is the exact opposite of that. We are not necessary. We are contingent. We are originated. We are not single. We are in a world of plurality. We are limited. We are corporeal. And for us to arrive there, either we have to become incorporeal, become invisible, become single, become non-delimited, and essentially become God by definition, or God has to lose his singleness, his simplicity, his necessity, and his incorporeality in order to come to this world of creation, for us to have a unity of experience, according to the Baha'i teachings, and thereby lose his godness. So that's why, logically, I think, according to the Baha'i teachings, it's just not possible. Either we have to become God, or God has to cease to become God.
I'm very curious because the language that you use to describe these things is very specific and technical. Do you have a background? Did you study any specific in metaphysics, any philosophy? Do you have some sort of training?
Not systematically. Well, I did my undergraduate degree as advanced Baha'i studies, but not the rest of it. My postgraduate studies were on different topics. But I have been interested, always, I think so. I'm perhaps a student of philosophy or mysticism or religion, but I've only scratched the surface, as you can imagine.
It's really...
Actually, sorry, I wanted you to perhaps describe for him the ring symbol, which shows the connection between, yes? I've been thinking about it as you're talking. I'm like, well, there's a symbol, I think, that describes that we all know.
I haven't thought about this group.
Come on. It's what he was describing. So, at least this is how it's been explained to me. Correct me if I'm wrong. You see, we call it the ring symbol, one of the ring symbols that Baha'is, you might find a Baha'i wearing it on their ring or their jewelry. This top line is God.
Can I just show this to the camera for a second?
Yes. You'll see it when you visit the shrines. It's up there. So this top line is God. This middle line, in the middle there, and going vertical, these are the manifestations of God, these messengers of God. And that's us, humanity, connected to God through these manifestations. But you can see, as Varga was describing, we have different stations. We are distinct from the manifestations and from God. Yet we're connected through the manifestation.
This is the great paradox of distinct yet connected.
Yes.
This is really the great paradox of religion. And it's really fascinating because each religion has its own metaphysical schema and tricks, and Ibn Arabi has really sophisticated ways to try and reconcile these paradoxes. And I think for our more advanced audience, these types of descriptions will be very fascinating to hear how within the Baha'i faith these paradoxes are explored and navigated and experienced. I think so. So thank you for sharing that. I do want to move to some of the other questions that we had here. Well, actually, Alyssa had a question.
Sorry, I'm not really eloquent in my question asking. But I want to know, as you believe that like all religions are true and that this is true for now, it sounds like when you're talking that there's things, just I know Judaism, mostly that there's things that are conflicting in the other religions. So are there points that you study in the other religions where you say this is, I know it happens like between Judaism and Christianity where it was very clear like, okay, this is very nice, but now we have a new thing and these things were wrong about Judaism and now we have Christianity. Does Baha'i also do that where you say this stuff is wrong, or is it, do you more just say that was right for that time, but this time has a new, fresh perspective? Because some of the metaphysical things you were saying about, like in Judaism, we believe that like God is here and in everyone and everything. You kind of say that, but then it's like the paradox again. What I'm hearing.
Is that one?
I think it's a new. Well, it touches on the. I think on the theme of progressive revelation. Yeah. Okay, I'm happy to talk to that and feel free
I'll chime in.
to jump in. But I think again this is an involved question and it needs some building. But I think we've addressed quite a few elements of the foundation, with which is essentially our relationship with God and the manifestations of God. So I think just the part that now we can take where we left is that the dual stations of the manifestation of God. So in their station of essential...
Sorry. Actually, I wasn't paying attention to questions. I was getting notes. But can someone repeat the question as they understood it, and then you can confirm that was your question, and then I can give you a pronunciation? What was the question that you heard us ask?
So in some religions there is this concept that what the previous religion said is wrong. How does the Baha'i faith explain this in its relation to the previous religion? Do we say that that it was for that time and now we've moved on, or it's just wrong? Or how do we interact with things simply that the Baha'i faith does not believe in previous religions?
Do you feel like that?
You totally accurately represented my question, but now hearing my question back, I want to add one little piece to it. That like, as like someone who is practicing a religion that Baha'i believes is an outdated religion, that you like, so there's a bit of a disconnect. And I also feel this like even within Judaism, sometimes I feel like we're practicing things that were meant for thousands of years ago, and that I believe that we can update within Judaism. And I want to understand how Baha'i interacts with the other religions that are still in existence and practicing today.
Yes, that's an interesting facet as well. So intra-faith or intra-religion change as well. So I might still start maybe with this essential unity and distinction. So manifestations of God in the sense that they are the first emanation from God, or the primal will, or the first intellect. In that sense, they can all be called by the same name. They represent the same essence, the same reality. They can be said to occupy the same station. So they are all one in that sense. But their individuality is not the result of their connection with the realm of God, or in the sense that they are the primal will, or they carry the Holy Spirit, or they are the Word of God. It is in the sense of their station of distinction. So that pre-existent essential reality that was created, the revelation, the first emanation, in its connection with the world of creation, which is the world of, it's a material world, it's a world of diversity, it's a visible realm, it's a material realm. It has to become, it has to have a material aspect, it has to have an element of change, it has to have an element of diversity and plurality. Even though that reality itself is spiritual and is one, and is spiritual and is single in its and invisible, when it is connected to this world of creation that is a visible realm and it's a material world, it has to accept the properties of visibility, of plurality, and as it pertains to the world of matter. Because of that, even though the realm of God is the realm of perfection and constancy and absolute singleness, the revelation that comes from God, when we feel it and when we experience it, because this realm is the realm of imperfection and is the realm of change and is the realm of plurality, it experiences this multiplicity, plurality, and change. And that is, I think, the fundamental, perhaps theological basis in the Baha'i writings for progressive revelation. But there is a social perspective to it as well, that the purpose of all religion is individual and social progress and transformation. Individual as in, to develop the capacities that we are all endowed with. In the realm of society and collective progress, for example, our peace and our unity and our security. And there are two aspects, I think, to each religion. There is the universal aspect that is fixed, I think we maybe briefly touched on this, and there is a temporal or a social aspect that changes over time. The universal aspect is fixed between all religions, and that is the truth of the religion. That's why many religions have so much in common. And this concept of, for example, mysticism that we touched upon, or many of those fundamental concepts that describe our relationship with God and with prophets and messengers, you can feel there is some similarity between them. The ethics is the same. But the temporal aspect, the laws that pertain to, let's say, birth and death and marriage and divorce and these things changes according to the realities of time and place in which those religions come. So I think the Baha'i faith describes or explains those differences between religions, the laws that have changed, or things that that the Baha'i faith has perhaps abrogated, in the sense of the difference in requirements of time and place and the exigencies of the reality of society at the time. It does not mean that they are wrong. I think that's a very relative term. They were perfect teachings from a divine source at the time that they were revealed, but because the reality of time has changed, and the Baha'i faith certainly believes that history has a direction, and we are moving towards a final cause, towards a telos, it defines history to be teleological. Because of that, every religion contributes to a stage in the development and in our movement towards that final cause. And I think that final cause is also defined in many religions in similar terms. It's a process of collective maturity of humankind. It's the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth. It's that process of reunification. In the realm of God, God is one. We have experienced plurality here, but we are essentially and inherently God-seeking. That is our natural constitution. That is our original constitution. So that we are going back towards God, we're going back towards that essential unity. So every religion has contributed, according to the reality of time and place in which it came, contributes towards that process of reunification. At some time, the focus was the unity at the familial unit, family unit. Later it became at a unit of tribe, let's say, at another point, unity of nation state, then unity of adherence of a religion. And the Baha'i faith now is promoting the unity at the world level of the globe.
That was really very beautiful, and I love how you tied it into the metaphysical grounding of the absolute, unified, and then the relative, the multiplicitous, and how those two aspects evolve within the traditions, where there is the eternal and there is the subjective, and that which changes with the time, which is right for the time. It needs to be adapted. There's a sort of an evolutionary sense that we're moving towards something, towards a greater perfection, a greater unity, which I think might bring us to the messianic question. I think it might lead directly there. But before we ask the question, I want to know, is there a process within the Baha'i faith itself that can recognize the things that within the Baha'i faith itself which are temporary, which need to be adjusted as time goes on? Is there such a process, an internal process for development and for perfection?
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm taking all the questions, please.
I want to turn the question of messianism to Sheree. I want you to start on that. So you can think about that. Well,
if I might just add before he goes on to
please,
this
of
one,
course. Please jump in at any time. By
yes,
either both of you.
Like as Varga said, when we describe religions of the past, that is how we describe them, and how he said that we really do recognize them as perfect. We really do recognize their divinity and their perfection. And in this day, as we are advancing toward this goal, the unification of humankind, the ends and the means must be both honorable. Yes? Must be both divine. So we cannot really, as Baha'is, sit here and say, oh, well, a Jewish person or a Muslim person or a Christian person is this, that, or the other in a critical way and expect that to bring us toward unity. So no, not at all. Our embrace is world-reaching. It really is a full embrace. So we participate in interfaith dialogues. We embrace our neighbors and our family members and our co-workers of various faiths, because this path towards unity is by being united. It is through unity. Baha'u'llah says the peace of humankind, its well-being and security, is unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. So our path toward this is also important, how we get there. And this is that essential unity, right, between the religions. So we see a harmony, we see a space for all, and this continuum. And there can be no critique, yes, or saying it was wrong or this or that. We really do recognize the divinity of the previous manifestations. To say you're Baha'i says that you say you believe that, you believe in them.
That opens an explicitly ecumenical space.
Yes. When you say the goal, the end goal of unifying everybody, when you guys are both speaking about this, I'm hearing people are trying to find God, something that you cannot truly understand the essence of it, because people are working from the family and the tribe, and eventually a religion is created. Is the end goal for everyone to embrace Baha'i as Baha'i believes, or is it really to squash the concept of all religions?
Oh. That's an interesting way you posed it. I don't think it's to squash all religion at all, because we believe that religion should be the source of good. We believe that it should be the source of inspiration and the ingathering of humanity. If it is used in another way, then that's not good. The end goal is the unification of humanity. If we describe it as Baha'is, perhaps it will look very Baha'i. But inherent in our humanity, as Varga was describing, is our diversity. Inherent in our humanity is difference of opinion, difference of idea, difference of path, right? It's not a uniformity at all, but it is a unity, it is an ingathering, it is a cohesion, it is a kind of all of us looking toward the same God. Does that answer? No.
Let me second your question. I think I'm going to get back to the previous question, but in that messianic phase, is religion practiced? Are there multiple religions practiced? Is the Baha'i faith practiced? What is the religion of the future age, if any?
So the concept of messianism does exist in the Baha'i faith. But I think the important point is, and I think the Baha'is believe that the concept of progressive revelation in some form or sense does exist in all religions, and I think that's an important point to acknowledge perhaps, because it might appear in different terms. For example, we have the concept of resurrection, we have the concept of return, we have the concept of abrogation in many religions, right? And I feel those describe the same theme of progressive revelation in a sense. If we acknowledge the essential unity of the manifestations of God, then return essentially becomes, the coming of a new manifestation of God, or a new messenger or prophet. Every new messenger could be the return of a previous or any other prophet of God. Resurrection is the same. So that eschatological end of day meeting with God, or that judgment, day of resurrection, the concept of end of days, is essentially the coming of a new manifestation of God again. You see how the concept of manifestation of God is quite central to all the Baha'i teachings. Because so in that day of judgment, which is essentially the coming of a new manifestation of God, the followers of a previous religion will be judged according to whether they accept or they reject the new manifestation of God. And that is why Baha'i faith believes that it's referred to as Day of Judgment, or the end of day. So it's the end of a previous dispensation. So that is perhaps the basis of the concept of messianism in the Baha'i faith as well. In one sense, Baha'u'llah is the promised one of all ages. So he is the return of the prophets of the past, but he is also the one that they have promised. So with him, Baha'is believe that the day of judgment or resurrection has appeared. At the same time, Baha'is believe in the concept of progressive revelation applying to the Baha'i faith itself as well, that the Baha'i faith is not the final religion. After the Baha'i faith, certainly other religions and other manifestations of God will appear. But I think, so really to now answer your question, if you don't mind, I think the point is that the Baha'i faith is a very new religion now. It has, appeared in 19th century. Baha'u'llah said that the duration of this religion, just like many other religions, will be at least 1,000 years. What happens, I think, what we see in all major religions is that in the early years and decades, and really first few hundred years of each religion, what happens is that the teachings of that religion are practiced. People put it to practice, they apply it, and they learn about the implications of that practice. What has happened is that those teachings are promulgated, they are translated, they are published, they are disseminated, and people learn about those. Communities are built based on those teachings. It has always happened like this. Communities emerge that embody those teachings, perhaps. And much later than that comes, the appearance of arts and philosophy and the theological debates and discussions and scholarship in that religion. But much after all of these things have already taken place, at the beginning of a religion, like now, we don't even know what all the teachings are. They have not been translated. Many teachings have not been published, many of the writings of Baha'u'llah. I think when they are all promulgated, the debates and scholarship and philosophy and art appear based on these teachings, then I think that perhaps is a more suitable time to now sit and explore those teachings and see what they say about the next manifestation of God. And
that's a very fascinating sort of historical angle to bring, which is also a point for concern, because if anyone is a student of religion, they know that religions begin very idealistic and very promising and very true to their principles, but part of, unfortunately, the human progress is that this degradation of religion. It becomes about power, it becomes about establishment, it becomes about pride and place. And this is, I mean, and this perhaps may be the psychological equivalent of the need for a returning manifestation. That throughout human history, we need someone to come and crack open the religion and say, okay, guys, we're doing it wrong, let's get back to principles. Is there a self-consciousness and a concern that within the Baha'i faith itself, being so young and being so fresh in the first 200 years, that it may follow the natural course of religions, which is to become stale and to become petrified and needing, again, I mean, maybe 1,000 years is a long time for religion to stay good to its principles. Is that a concern? Is that something which plays into Baha'i thinking?
Yes, in fact, this same exact concept is described in the Baha'i writings, that all religions, including the Baha'i faith, will go through that life cycle. In fact, it's likened to the cycles of seasons.
Yeah.
That we experience the spring of religion when the teachings begin to be promulgated, just like the flowers bloom. And then there will be the season for the summer when the teachings come to fruition. You can see that Baha'i faith is still in its very early stages, in its formative years. It's perhaps in its spring at the moment. You have not seen the fruition of the Baha'i teachings throughout the world yet. But there is this acknowledgement that the same life cycle will certainly apply to the Baha'i faith as well. And that is exactly as you described, the reason why new religions come and new manifestations.
That's so brilliant. The idea of a life cycle of religion is such a beautiful idea. My only disappointment is that you guys didn't come dressed in spring clothing. But that is such a beautiful idea, and it's such a healthy idea to know that religions themselves are organic and biological and go through a life cycle and need to be, revivified and resurrected with new blood, with new freshness. And the winter of religion is very hard for religion, but for religion to have its own self-awareness, to acknowledge that religions go through winter and go through a period where it looks like everything is barren, to then be reborn. And to be open to that, to return. So there's an opening to, in about sometime 800 years from now, our great grandchildren, for the next manifestation after Baha'u'llah to come and respring religion? Is that anticipated, expected?
Absolutely. This is what Baha'u'llah has taught us about religion. Like this whole idea of progressive revelation absolutely applies to the Baha'i faith.
So even the Baha'i faith itself is not perfect. There are elements of eternality, and there are elements of temporality as well. Both of them are present within the tradition. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would suggest that is perfect.
That's really beautiful. Yeah,
right.
That nature itself has that balance in the two. That's really beautiful. That's really, really beautiful. I'm curious to know. I mean, from thinking about religions on a historical scale, it may still be early in the Baha'i days to think about how internal structures of codification and then modification can take place. I guess, is there a codified book of rules that has emerged within Baha'i faith, or is that yet to come? Is there such a thing? Yes?
There is a book of laws.
Uh-huh.
It's called the jXaviErre, the book of laws, revealed by Baha'u'llah himself. So it exists, yes.
And those are practiced, those are strictly kept to. What's the relationship with those laws?
So this is interesting.
Are they more like recommendations, or
No, not at all. These are the laws that govern the Baha'i faith and Baha'i communities, as well as Baha'i institutions. So the current head of the faith, the Universal House of Justice, along with this jXaviErre, reveals the laws that are applicable for Baha'i communities at a particular time. So not all of the laws are in application yet, but a lot of them are, yes, absolutely.
Is there a census of how many laws there are? Is there a total tally of the laws?
Where do I know?
I haven't counted, but the book is a brief book.
It's a brief book?
It has 190 verses. It's not a lengthy book at all.
He's like
not to be competitive or anything, but in Judaism we have 613. So.
Yes, and I think the point is, first Baha'u'llah revealed certain laws, but he left so much to the Universal House of Justice. So I think there was the question, what happens within the religion, that concept of revelation that is progressive. So Baha'i faith has instituted change also within the Baha'i dispensation by having the institution of the Universal House of Justice that is elected to operate and govern the Baha'i faith. So that institution can enshrine new laws based on the realities of time and place.
I'm getting a sense that there's a lot of spiritual maturity in the Baha'i faith. And I'm not saying this just to flatter you guys. I think that, firstly, the principle of knowing that change is part and parcel and making space for change. The idea of not indoctrinating children until they're 15 is a very mature thing to do. My critical question after being complimentary is, does that spiritual maturity really take into account the nature of the human being? Or is it too idealistic of the human? Perhaps humans can't have such a free leash and can't be left to do whatever they want up until they're 15, or to have laws that are flexible. Is it too idealistic of a spiritual vision?
Would you like to? We'll both, but would you like to start? Or should I?
I think this is tied in the Baha'i view of history again. The Baha'i faith believes that humanity is going through a process of collective maturity, and that many things that applied to us in the past no longer apply, and that is why religions come, because a problem that we had in the past, many hundred years ago probably, it needs a new remedy, right? The problems change, so the remedy must change. And the Baha'i faith believes that we are now at the threshold of collective maturity. So at individual level, yes, we are at all different levels of maturity, however we define it, but collectively, through this process of thousands of years, we are at the threshold of collective maturity. Let's say in the past, maybe thousands of years ago, we were at a stage of childhood, collectively. Now we are like teenagers, and everything that comes with it. I think that example of teenager might be quite revealing in things that we are experiencing collectively.
So where do you say we are now?
We are teenagers.
We're teenagers now?
Yeah, so the hopes and aspirations, and at the same time, the challenges that come with teenagers.
This is the religion for the TikTok generation.
Greetings. I think also, like you asked, are we idealistic? And I think we believe in ideals for sure, and in principles. We elevate things to the level of principle for sure, and we try and find application of principles and ideals in our lives. But I wouldn't describe the faith as idealistic as if it is perhaps naive or blindly optimistic. We're optimistic, but because we are quite clear on what we have to do, so we're hopeful. For example, this idea of children or youth having the freedom to choose their religion at the age of 15, the age of maturity. This is grounded in an understanding or in a belief of human nature and in the nature of the child or of a junior youth or of a youth. So our perception, our idea of what a human being is, this idea that you have a rational soul and that through education you can arrive at a certain level of maturity in which you can reason, you can have articles of faith, and you can determine and recognize truth. So there's work that goes into that 15-year-old being able to arrive well, and this is the work of the parents and their communities. So it's not an abandoned youth and whatnot. We do our best to offer them education, to have them practice and experience life so that they can judge truth from falsehood, so that they can aspire to good, so that they can strive and champion justice. I think the same is true in our hope for humanity. Like, we're not blind or oblivious to the sufferings or to the injustices that are present and prevalent in the world. And so if you look at the human being the way Baha'u'llah describes us, right, as these eternal souls, physical and material, with the ability, with the capacity to tend toward perfection and to tend toward good, with the capacity to know right from wrong, diversity inherent in us, well then, the questions abound. you look around and you say, well, women are treated in a particular way in the world that does not reflect this nobility of this human being that we're describing. People of color are not regarded or embraced in a way that would reflect this nobility. People who are not materially wealthy are regarded in a particular way. So what happens with this view is that, what happens with this view of humanity is that a lot of the readings of reality become quite clear. And then this, I don't want to call it a quest, but this feeling, you know, is strong within you for justice and for unity. Because you recognize the nobility in others. And because you recognize it, you're hopeful. You are committed to say, well, you know what, if we can get through some of this, it's going to take time, it's going to take hard work, it will not be easy. We will fail sometimes. We'll try something and it won't work, and we'll try something else. Because of that, we're hopeful. And because of that, we're optimistic. Does that make sense? Like, it's not a...
Absolutely. If you have those ideals which you aim to, and then you can compare the current status quo and say we're not there yet, and we can expect so much more.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's also a very empowering message that to see the human as where they could be instead of where perhaps they are.
Yeah.
It's very rich. There's two more questions which I feel we have not yet gone into, which is the question of heaven and hell, and the question of religion and science. Let's pose these two questions and then we'll wrap up. So we may have to keep these more rapid fire.
It doesn't work for me.
It's subjective, it's like mysticism.
Rapid fire, we have to begin from the beginning of existence.
What is fire?
What is Simona? What is time?
That's a good one.
I tried that with my dad. Sorry, just have a total sidebar.
You try pulling out anything?
Like, I was doing my undergraduate dissertation, and I was, and he's like, come on, how are you? He was like pushing me, and I said, you know what? In the timeless realm, I'm already a graduate.
Ah, that's great.
He's like, well, in the realm with time, you need to get on. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
These two questions work well in tandem, so let's put them both out, and then we'll all jump in. The Baha'i faith has a very unique position on the relationship between religion and science, which reflects something of the maturity of the progression of the religion, which I think many other religions perhaps don't, at least in their more fundamental manifestations, don't have such a view on religion and science, and perhaps the harmony that could be between them. And the second question is the question of heaven and hell. And I think these questions are related because a lot of the contemporary scientific worldview is one which does away with concepts of heaven and hell. You know, we live YOLO, we live here a material life, live it up, and then we hit the grave. And that's it. So, let's perhaps begin with heaven and hell. What is the Baha'i notion of heaven and hell? And how do we reconcile that with the relationship that Baha'i has with religion and science? We can tackle those together in 7 minutes.
I'll do heaven and hell and
Yes.
science and religion.
Yes.
Well, 15 minutes is not enough. No, I'll try. Look, I think there are a few concepts that are related to be able to explain heaven and hell. One is the notion of Abdul Baha talks about sensible realities versus intelligible realities. Another one is our position in time as one that is at the threshold of collective maturity. And another one is the concept of reward and punishment. And I'll try to very quickly address maybe all of those, because I think that kind of frames the question of heaven and hell. Abdullah explains that we have sensible realities and we have intelligible or conceptual and spiritual realities. Sensible realities are, realities, things that we learn through senses, obviously, our 5 senses. Like, it's hot now. It's, a simple, sensible reality. But we have also intelligible realities or conceptual realities or spiritual realities. These are realities or concepts perhaps that don't have an outer form or place, when we talk about knowledge, when we talk about love, right? You can't feel it with your five senses, and that is, I think, an intelligible reality. Now, quite often we have to explain an intelligible reality through statements that draw on sensible reality. So we cast them in the mold of sensible realities. For example, when we say my heart is uplifted, it does not mean that my heart is literally removed and it goes up. Or when I say that you kept me in the dark. I'm trying to talk about an intelligible reality, but I cast it in the mold of sensible realities. And Baha'i faith explains that heaven and hell are examples of intelligible realities, but because of where we are in the process of maturity of humankind collectively, they had to be explained in sensible realities. For example, association of hell with fire, for example. Another point is that because of where we were...
Can we call these metaphors? Is that a fair term?
Yes, true. Because of where we were collectively, I think, in the process of our maturity, I think the conversation that God had with us needed to be in the form of a conversation that we have with a child. My daughter, when she was, for example, 1 year old, she used to like playing so much with electric wires, with charger cables, right? Live wire. And she would put it in her mouth. I could not obviously talk to her about the concept of conductor and non-conductor. I could not talk to her about cause and effect. I could tell her about the concept of burning, right? That if you do this, you will burn. That is hot. And that was perhaps something that she would understand. And I think because of where we were collectively in the process of our maturity, these concepts needed to be communicated in very simple terms. Association of heaven, for example, with milk and honey, or association of hell with fire. Because collectively, in our process of collective thinking and reflection and practice, that's what we would have understood. But also another related concept, I think, is the concept of reward and punishment. We experience reward and punishment in this world, so existential, if you may, rewards and punishments. We might focus on purity of our heart and our soul, and we draw closer to God. And that is an existential reward that we experience in this world. But there's also ultimate rewards and punishment. After we pass on from this world, there are also rewards and punishment that we could experience in whatever shape or form, in an ultimate form or spiritual realm. And that is, we might avail ourselves of special bounties and favors of God, and that is our heaven. So essentially, Baha'is believe that heaven and hell are intelligible realities. They are not physical realms or physical places in which you experience milk and honey or fire, but that it's described in relation to our being able to receive the bounties and favors of God, or we draw, or we shield ourselves from it, or we draw further from God's special favors. And that could happen in this world or in the world hereafter.
I like that's an important part at the end, that it also takes place in this world, that we can experience. You're saying we can experience those realities of close.
Hell in this world or next.
I think that's important. That's an important point. Sherry, anything to add before moving to your side of the question?
No.
Then give us your side. Science and religion.
Well, I mean, what Varma described, I think, is a very good example of the harmony between science and religion. He used what we can really describe as scientific terms that are associated with this material world, to describe something that is of the spiritual world. And so for Baha'is, we believe that science and religion are like two branches of knowledge. These are two complementary ways that we can understand and connect with truth. And that, we are quite interested in history, right? You've noticed. So as we look throughout history and you go back and you examine human communities, the times at which the religion was fertile, yes, and was in its heyday, there was real harmony between science and religion, and we saw the flourishing of arts and architecture and education and mathematics and sciences. It was flourished through the inspiration, through the motivation of religion. So how do we understand science and religion, for example, like how they really do relate to one another? We have, well, let me step back a bit. So, for example, science, we describe it as rational thought, the ability to experiment and to systematize, the ability to logically make conclusions, derive at something. Religion we describe as intuitive or inspirational. We describe faith. We describe inspiration. We believe that these elements are present and should be in both fields, science and religion. When a scientist is conducting research, they are using articles of faith and intuition and inspiration as they're conducting and trying to really get down to the truth of their question. In religion, perhaps not as much, but in religion, we must strive to be systematic. We must strive to find ways. How is it that we can educate generation after generation, and perhaps in community and after community, morality, moral teachings? We must learn systematization. We have to, for lack of a better word, we have to experiment. We take what we understand and we try it out. We come back and we think about it. Well, how did that work? Okay, let's try it again. This is scientific. This is a scientific method. So we believe that at its best, when these two branches of knowledge are working together, also to temper one another, right? Unfettered religion can lead us to superstition, can lead us to prejudice. Unfettered science can lead us down a path of materialism, or a path of what we're seeing now, maybe detachment from the well-being of others, yes? And so when they harmonize, when they come together and are allowed to really work with one another, like really engage, that is when we see the fruits of humanity. Mm. And we feel that going forward, this will be the way, more and more.
That was really fantastic. That was really more than I expected to get, because I thought at the very best we have some sort of rapprochement, some sort of peace treaty, ceasefire between religion and science. But what you're saying is that really the spirit of each other has to really inform and involve and really develop and push them together towards our common goal. It was really fantastic. It's really great. Are there any final thoughts, reflections, questions, compliments, criticisms that you guys would like to share?
Oh, it's wonderful what you do, and I think try to bridge different thoughts and the channel that you have is just such a wonderful initiative.
Thank you.
Yeah, keep it going. And
thank you.
Best of luck.
Thank you so much. We hope to be doing really what's in spirit with the Baha'i faith, of moving towards unity and moving towards a shared humanity, and the principles that you point out of looking at the highest expectation of what a human could be, and judging our own behavior and the placement of others, both spiritually and both materially, against that paradigm. I think is so important. And I think it's very appropriate. So now that we had one kind word, we're gonna have to have a
No, I don't have anything. I'm really grateful to have been a part of the conversation. I think it was enlightening. And I had told Sama, it pushed me, right, in preparing. Really, you have to really think once again, right? Some things that we had thought about a while ago, you take for granted. So I'm thankful to you all for letting me get there. And I hope that it was meaningful and helpful.
Absolutely.
Our participation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for putting in the effort and the time, both of you, to prepare and to think about these things and to really present it in such a beautiful way. And I think that anytime there's a genuine meeting of people in good faith to talk about the things that are deepest to them and closest to them, and as you said, in a systematic and a critical and a rational way, is really the way that we move the agenda of peace and unity forward together. So thank you guys for joining us, and thank you, Salma, for helping coordinate, and thank you, Alyssa, for dragging me here, and for feeding me, and for making sure that I slept, and for everything that Alyssa does, or else I would be a mess. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
That's all right. Salma, any final words?
No, I'm not. I'm just so happy that the overall knowledge has been concluded. Like, I have more questions now. After listening to your questions, I have my own list.
We're going to do a round two with
You're going to have a round.
So I think that's wonderful, because when people from outside, they come and they have a different perspective and they ask questions, that makes us also revisit our text and try to understand it in a different way and explore it from different angles. So it also helps to deepen our understanding.
Good.
So the process is very productive and
Good.
constructive for us as well. Very rewarding for
I'm
all
really
of
glad.
us.
I'm so glad. I find the same. I find that when conversation is kept inside, there's a lack of opportunity for fresh pair of eyes, for fresh pair of questions. And sometimes the question may be totally off the mark, maybe silly, but sometimes it like opens up a new. And I hope I wasn't flippant or sacrilegious at any point. I'm a very religious person. I take these things seriously, but I think there's a place for humor. So if I offended the gods,
I don't think so.
don't strike me down.
God is humorous himself. Exactly.
God loves laughter.
What's it? Humor is it? Tell me. You mean it's
Rafa should add, I know only superficial, my knowledge is superficial. So I know that one of the names of God is Al-Mazah, which is the humorist.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, well.
You caught me off guard.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Wait, give us the etymology there. I'm so curious. What is the meaning of this word? How's it understood?
Humor is a good thing, right? It's
It's
yeah,
fantastic.
so, and if God is perfection and possesses all names and attributes,
Then God must have a good sense of humor too.
then
Wow, now we're going to figure out what type of sense of humor is going to have.
I mean, Ahmed Baha described laughter as spiritual relaxation.
That's very fascinating. Has anyone read Umberto Eco, The Name of the Rose?
No.
Umberto Eco wrote a book, a fantastic author, of course, Pendulum wrote Name of the Rose, about a monk that, it's like a murder mystery. Basically, this guy discovers that in an ancient Greek manuscript, Aristotle speaks positively about humor and laughter. And this text was like hidden by the church because they had to be serious. And the guy who reveals this text, he gets killed to keep it a secret. But the fact that there's that laughter is a spirit. What did you say? Laughter
Spiritual
is
relaxation.
a spiritual relaxation, and humor is the name of God. It's mind blowing.
but the concept of humor has changed over time. Now sometimes we use it as like joking or being superficial, whereas actually the highest form of humor is that wonderment and awe at a question that makes it truly humorous, right?
There is real humor.
Yeah, when you solve a problem or make the connection, I think in a puzzling way.
It's very interesting. It's not it's not just about being witty or about being insulting or about all the ways that humor is used, but there is a space even today where the comedian is really a philosopher in some sense, and they're really exploring deep social issues, societal issues, spiritual issues through the tools of humor. That's a fascinating idea. That was a lot of fun. On top of everything else, it was so much fun to sit down and to chat with you, wonderful, beautiful people. It was really, really, really
I had a good
experience.
time too.
I spent so much time in Israel breaking my teeth with Israelis to chat with a fellow American, a fellow. It's a great
That's right.
pleasure.
Listen, it's one world.
And Salma, I just want to thank you for. By now I should know this, right? I want to thank you for bringing jXaviErre on. I'm the worst with names, guys. Do not take this personally. I think because it's very easy to speak in principle about things, but actually having a woman's voice here and having a colored woman's voice to come and represent and be part of the conversation is it's performative, right? We're expressing what we're aspiring to. So thank you for bringing such a beautiful person to join us. We need to on the channel. One of the criticisms is that I don't have enough female scholars. And it's very hard. It's very hard to find female scholars. So thank you for adding your voice to my project.
Thanks for calling me a scholar. But I'm happy to be there. I agree.
Aspiring scholars.
I agree. We must seek women out. Yeah.
Yes.
At this point in time, we have to seek them out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Yes, you can see. That's your